He really could do great things in stopping wars. He really could, if he wanted to, be like, let's sort out healthcare, pick up 5 easy answers that have been sitting on the shelf for 30 years, implement them. And yeah, we would talk about the FDR era, the Reagan era, then the Trump era.
Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I'm Murray, in charge of podcasting, and in charge of politics is Robert Morris. How have you been this week?
Honestly, Rory, I'm amazing.
Wow, that's what I like to hear.
Phenomenal. You know what happened today and yesterday and the day before, and I think the day before that?
Okay, tell me what happened.
I didn't murder any children.
That's what I like to hear, Rob. You've turned a new leaf in the new year.
As a U.S. taxpayer, over the past 4 or 5 days, I haven't murdered any children. Now, I am a U.S. taxpayer, and I do have, Israel. So, there's definitely been a sniper shot here or there. We're definitely a few dead Palestinian kids. But for the past 16 months, every day I've woken up to news that I've killed 5, 10, a dozen, 70, 80, 100 Palestinian men, women, and children. And for the past 4 days, that has not been the case.
Have you ever thought about moving to a part of America where you're a net drain? So technically, you're taking money away from these organizations?
Oh, that's an
That's
interesting
kind of what
thing.
Northern Ireland is.
Just sort of tax rebellion generally.
They could have got one more missile.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's an interesting. Move to Mississippi or something where where I take in more federal money than I give in. That's an interesting question. But I mean it is freaking amazing. We are obviously going to be talking about the first couple days of the Trump administration, and I've read a book from the Heritage Foundation, and we're gonna do this is going to be a big Trump derangement syndrome episode, and obviously Donald Trump is not okay, not normal, but it's also worth pointing out that in the first 4 or 5 days of Trump, he's also not doing a genocide, which is a bar that Joe Biden and the Democrats failed to leap.
But also, there's something incredible that's now, I don't know what you call it. Would you call it a
Mhm.
technology or a new hack? But I've found a way you can find out if a news organization is slightly fascistic or not.
Oh yeah? How's that?
Are they defending a certain a salute that Elon Musk did? Because if they're bending over backwards to defend the salute, then they may tend in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to Elon Musk and his salute, but I just do want to emphasize, and also I want to emphasize that by the time this is being recorded, who knows? Trump could be just as bad as genocide. Donnie could be just as bad as genocide Joe. That could very well be what's happening by the time this is being recorded. I don't know that that's the case. I mean, Israel's working very, very hard. Basically, Trump and his envoy pushed them out of Gaza, forced them to sign on to the ceasefire that they'd been ignoring for 6 months. And their first move was to crack down massively on the West Bank. And they're basically doing everything they can to prompt a third intifada. They're doing everything they can to get the Palestinians to rise up and take the decision out of Trump's hands. But Donald Trump and his envoy, Steve Witkoff, who's just another, gross New York City real estate development guy, actually, acted out Bill Clinton's famous question, which was, who's the effing superpower here? Donald Trump and Steve Witkoff know who the superpower is here and gave Bibi his marching orders. And thus far, Bibi appears to be obeying, which is what he absolutely would have done if Biden had given him his marching orders. So, and I don't know, we're gonna engage in this. We're gonna get outraged about Elon Musk's Nazi salute. We're gonna talk about how insanely corrupt and probably disastrous. I'm seriously disturbed by things that Trump has done. We're only on day 3 when we're recording this. However,
But you made a lot of money in Trump coin.
oh, well, there's that. However, let me just finish that. However, and I know it sounds like I'm harping on this, and you're trying to, bring us to more crowd pleasing stuff. For 16 months up until Trump and his envoy got to the scene, I was complicit as a U.S. taxpayer in a genocide. I'm not right now, and that feels really good. I mean, you know what? We're never going to get everything that we want, and I do think that Trump is going to lead to chaos and destruction, as we will spend the rest of this episode talking about. But he's also not permanently tainting my immortal soul with genocide, which is
Do
what
you
Joe Biden was doing.
feel you were wrong? Because you seem to have an idea that if Kamala got in, she would be able to stop it and Trump would make things worse.
So this is the same. No, what I said was I expected a ceasefire out of both of them.
Okay.
However, I do think, and this remains the case, I think that Kamala would have gotten a ceasefire and would have promptly fed Gaza, would have made decisions that led to the rebuilding of Gaza. Trump could do that, but I think what is probably more likely is going to be like, what? I got you a ceasefire. What do you want from me? And then the disease, the starvation would continue to impact Gaza. So it's not saying like,
He was talking about how Gaza has some great seafront property potential.
yes. And it's interesting seeing people like desperately trying to sort of twist that as like oh wow, he's going to be even worse than Biden. He has done, like, he lifted some minor last minute sanctions that Joe Biden had put on some particularly horrific settlers in the West Bank. But the fact is that, like, Rory, for 16 months, we were murdering women, children, men, women, and children every day in the dozens, and Trump stopped that.
Yeah.
And like, we'd love it if, it would be intellectually consistent with what we know, with what we'd like the picture to be. But like, Donald Trump is not a mass murderer of children yet, and Joe Biden absolutely is. It's interesting. A lot of people that I agree with and trust and respect their ability, just watching their brains be sort of a little bit broken by that. And I think we like to live in the brain brokenness here. And I remain very concerned that Trump isn't going to facilitate the rebuilding or is going to allow the genocide of disease and starvation, wipe Gaza out in different ways. And so much remains to be seen, but we're not dropping 2,000-pound bombs on tents full of children at this point for the first time in 16 months.
Definitely something that needs to be celebrated.
Yeah.
And weirdly, it seems like it's been forgotten already when it's just, horror upon horrors of the modern world.
And well, that's the way we do it, is we try to we try to forget these things. And that's my big concern with Trump, is that yes, the actual direct murder will stop, but the starvation and disease will continue. I thought Kamala would be better about that. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. We shall see.
So a big tick for Trump.
Yeah, a big win for Trump.
The first 100 hours.
And the first, it was the pre hours, and it's interesting. A lot of resistance libs are like, "Oh, look what Joe Biden did for us! He finally got that ceasefire." And it's just like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, even any serious news organization is like, yeah, like, it's quite obvious that it was Donald Trump and his envoy Steve Witkoff who held Netanyahu's feet to the fire, and that's why this got done.
What's Woodcoff's history? Do you know much about him? Like, what sort of things can we expect from him in the next 4 years?
Oh, well, Witkoff is, he's a New York State real estate developer. I don't know that he's had, I think he had involvement in the first Trump administration in like commissions and like business councils that were related to Trump stuff. I don't think he's got a ton of government experience, but he does apparently have, my understanding is he's a American of the Jewish faith or what have you, which led to sort of an amusing interaction with Netanyahu, where he was coming from Qatar, which means, with Hamas's, proposal, and was like he's like, all right, baby, I'm coming to town. We need to hash this out. And Netanyahu was like, oh no, don't you understand? It's the Sabbath. And we never meet on the Sabbath, trying to like push it off. And Witkoff was like, who are you trying to kid, BB? Like, I know you're just as secular as I am. F you, we're meeting right now. We're the superpower. And Netanyahu was like, yes, sir, as he absolutely would have had to have been if Biden had ever had the salt to not be a mass murderer. So yeah, so Witkoff, I think he's just a New York negotiating real estate guy. Was given a clear goal by Trump, and he accomplished it. And infinitely outpaced Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the perfect Washington, D.C. Democratic diplomatic guy who's like walking around, running around town, giving interviews about what an amazing job Biden and Trump have done. And this one New York real estate guy went and got something done that Biden Blinken couldn't get done in 16
Well,
months.
from what I've heard about Trump talking about things, and when he was signing all these
Hmm.
executive orders,
Hmm.
basically he seems to have just a sort of, we are in charge of the world, like we're going to do what we want, and this basically telling Benjamin Netanyahu, you're not going to do this genocide anymore. Are we going to see more of just America throwing its weight around?
Absolutely. That's what's been promised.
Greenland, Canada, next on the
That's
menu?
what's been promised. I don't know Greenland, Panama, Canada stuff. I think it's kind of I think it's more rhetorical. I mean, who knows? Who freaking knows? But I think it's more just to say, like, "Ha ha, we're here to push you around. You better, acquiesce in stuff that we actually want." I think it's a strong negotiating position
Uh-huh.
meant to amuse and surprise. I'm much, much more worried about Mexico. I think there were executive orders around.
Yeah, it's been an executive order to say that cartels are terrorists, and from what I understand, it's completely open season on terrorists. You can sort of do whatever you want.
I mean, yeah, yes, to a degree. Of course, there's different levels of what the terrorist thing is, and I haven't like parsed what exactly that is. I really hope I don't have to all of a sudden become the U.S. war on terror in Texas and Arkansas and New Mexico channel and Arizona channel. But that may be what is in store. I'm a lot more worried about that than I am about sort of Canada, Panama, what have you. But, yeah, so a good transition point from, Israel and anti-Semitism and, what the US establishment really cares about would probably be that extraordinary moment you mentioned with Elon Musk earlier, where he, managed to do not 1, but 2.
Yes, he turned around and did another one. It was
Yeah,
fantastic.
it's like, if it were 1, it'd be like, "Oh, did he," he does this weird thing where he jumps in an X or whatever,
Yeah. And also,
like
well, quite often I've seen people then cut together a load of Democrats doing what look like
mhm.
Nazi salutes, but when you see the footage, it's like Obama was just waving,
Yep.
So a wave
Mhm.
from a 360 angle, you can find one, but yeah, it's also the fact he did it twice. Yeah, as
Well,
you've pointed out, it's just outstanding.
that's what it was for me. It's, if he okay, like, he whatever. I mean, it's also worth pointing out he's ketamine to the gills. Like, this is a guy who
That's another thing it seems very worrying. I see a lot of like normalization of ketamine. From what I understand, it's a very powerful painkiller. I remember hearing about a man that was, his arms and legs were, he was beaten up so badly, he was just in constant pain. He was trying all the drugs. The only thing that seemed to work was ketamine. But the horrible thing with ketamine is it dissolves your bladder. So what he said, he was in a vicious cycle where he was in so much pain because of his bladder, but the only thing that would cure it was ketamine. So you're in this horrible doom loop of constantly dissolving your bladder away. So I do not know what sort of stage of this that Musk is in, because he says he's got a prescription, but when you're a billionaire, you can get a prescription for anything. Yeah, it's horrific.
wow, I'd never heard of I don't know. I mean, ketamine has been a long-term party drug, since, that,
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah. But when
used
the
by
party never ends, when you're a billionaire, like, I don't know, is he on a second bladder? Can you get that? Artificial ones? Like, it's possible the man is in intense pain a lot of the time.
I had not heard of that until I mean, ketamine is just the horse tranquilizer that I've had friends passing out at parties on since the 1990s, I think I don't know about the bladder dissolving, that sounds horrible,
It's horrific,
but
yeah.
yeah, but, I just seeing other footage of him from the inauguration, which could be, maybe unfairly, it just does look like he's
Well, I
sorta
remember
like
actually seeing that one
mhm,
live because he's standing
yeah,
beside as a baron. It's either that or he's a billionaire being told to sit still for an hour and he's
mhm,
never had to do that before. But
yeah,
yeah, he
and
is just doing
sort of
something. It's a muscle
lolling his head
relaxant as
about,
well,
yeah,
so
yeah.
who knows? But yeah.
But, regardless, there's no if you watch the clip, and I think embarrassingly, even news organizations like NBC are kind of being resistant of providing the full clip. If you look at it, I mean, he does his little arm salute, and then he does it again, in another direction. I mean, like, it's interesting because my instinct with these sorts of things, like sort of viral clips, hand motions, this sort of thing, is to minimize it, but this is pretty clear
Mhm.
and the implications of it are pretty clear. I think, like, I don't know what is in Elon Musk's soul, but it's almost worse than if he were this was some kind of intentional white supremacist move. It's almost worse that he kind of thinks it's funny. Like he
Well,
kind of thinks he could get away with it, and he's getting
mhm,
away with it, and
I
he
don't
thinks
know.
it's amusing. Like
There's
he's like,
one theory that is to keep a lot of the hard right that do support him on side, but he's not actually, into it. But when you consider, is it what's the right wing or the far right party in Germany that he's a big fan of?
AFD.
AFD in Germany, and also the
Hmm.
fact that one of the most sort of right wing parties in the United Kingdom would be was UKIP, and then it was the Brexit Party, and now it's called Reform. Is headed by Nigel Farage. It's weirdly structured as a business, so it's one of the least democratic parties in the UK. And Elon Musk fell out with him because he wants Tommy Robinson, who is a man that has, I think, kicked a police officer in the head at least once and been to jail multiple times, known for just his hatred of Muslims in general, a massive racist, but he wants him in charge. So, and there's just lots of other things. So when you add up all of these very close to Nazi things, he keeps kind of doing Nazi things.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, it's I don't know. The guy's a mess, and it's a real shame because he's an incredibly significant figure in the military-industrial complex, in aerospace, in the green transition, in electric cars. I mean, just endless. And yeah, really does seem like he's kind of a lunatic. Yeah, legitimate white supremacist, sure, but I also just think he thinks it's all just kind of funny. This is all really a joke to him.
It's hard to know, like, when there's a great television show called Silicon Valley that follows a lot of the sort of
Uh,
characters you'll see here, and
uh-huh.
you'll follow like a billionaire, and it's the fact that everyone's a yes man and everyone's career is dependent on you. So I just think it can be very difficult to sense what reality is. Like, you can just get trapped by all these people that rely on you, think your jokes are funny, and do this here. And then when you poke into the real world, so yeah, his mind is not
There's
well.
an amazing tweet that I wish I could find. It was something that's like being rich like Elon Musk must be just this extraordinary trip. You know, all of your furniture costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Nobody ever tells you no. It must be the cognitive equivalent of getting kicked in the head by a horse every day.
Hmm.
Just like it's yeah, he's a mess. We will unfortunately have plenty of opportunities to talk about Elon Musk. What I want to talk about today is just sort of the general mess surrounding Donald Trump. I think it's, Trump's idiot oligarchy, I think will be the title of the episode because it is shocking how incoherent all of this is. Do you remember the Project 2025 kerfluffle?
That yeah, basically it was a bit like, oh no, we're not going to do that, but it seemed to just be a very boring way to kind of be a bit dictatorshipy.
So I decided to read. I only made it 230 out of 270 pages
Mm.
of the way into the Project 2025 book. Actually, when it became a big deal, they actually canceled the release of this book until after the election.
Okay.
It's Kevin D. Roberts, who runs an organization called the Heritage Foundation. He is a fire breather. Like this is apparently the nicer title. It used to be
Okay.
Burning Down Washington to Save America or something along those lines. The initial chapters of this are just like infantile, like 4chan. It's all in complete sentences and grammatically correct, but like what is conveyed is like the angriest sort of nihilist, like punk rock, but like racist punk rock. You just like, and it's not explicitly racist in many places, but it's just fire and brimstone and adolescent petulance.
Hmm.
And it's like people have emphasized that it's kind of scary in that respect, but it's also hilarious. This book is like one of the funniest and saddest things I have ever read. I think it's like kind of like because it's such a way station, it's like a halfway point in the evolution of the Republican Party, in the evolution of conservative thought. Because the Heritage Foundation is like Ronald Reagan's think tank. Like it was founded
Did
in
he set
19
it up, or was it one that became closely aligned with him early on?
It's one that became closely aligned with him. Dates back to 1973. Seems to have had like the same president for much of its
Hmm.
existence, like from the 1980s into the teens. Since then, they've been sort of trying to switch it up, perhaps unsurprisingly, considering how humiliating the Bush presidency was for like old line conservatism. So they've been sort of switching it back and up, trying to figure out what to do. And this Kevin D. Roberts guy is like, okay, this is what we need. He's Trumpy enough, like, and he's willing to sort of like be all about the Trumpiness, but at the same time, he's totally constrained by the traditional concerns of the Heritage Foundation, which is making business richer and helping elites and rich people. So it's really interesting. The book has a foreword from J.D. Vance.
Okay. Was that before he was picked?
I assume it was in the works before he was picked. But it was like kind of part of the campaign to like, not, I don't mean the campaign like for votes electorally, but the like political campaign within the conservative movement for J.D. Vance to align with this guy. And this is a really interesting, this is almost an encapsulation of what's going on, I think, though actually this is maybe a little unfair to J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley, who I think do at least occasionally put their money where their mouth is. What's interesting about J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley, these are younger Republican senators, is that they're willing to speak heresy. Of course, they worship Ronald Reagan. Of course, conservative, blah, 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 blah. But the heresy they're willing to speak is that, gee whiz, maybe a country and an economy entirely turned over to the Fortune 500 is a bad idea. Which is, I mean, for anybody in the Republican Party to say that before 2016 or 2015 and Trump was like mind-blowing heresy. But what's interesting and what people keep pointing to is that, yes, J.D. Vance, will occasionally focus on some corporate malfeasance. Like, there's not a big overarching policy change here yet. I think that, like, it's a race to define the next 40 years, whichever political party successfully completes the process of giving up on pro-business fundamentalism. So the Democrats and the Republicans leadership at this point, certainly in this last election, Trump and Kamala Harris, both of them are still pro-business fundamentalists,
Oh yeah, yeah.
above everything, this, that,
We
and
have
the other thing.
no party saying we should raise taxes.
Yeah. And so what's fascinating about this book is that this book repeatedly, over and over and over again, says we need to get away from pro-business fundamentalism, and it acknowledges that fact. The problem is this guy is still running the Heritage Foundation,
Yeah.
which is entirely reliant on the donations of elderly pro-business fundamentalists. So it's like it's the most schizophrenic thing I have ever read. Like, I have notes going through page
Is there
by
like a lot of
page.
backtracking where he tries to make it out like he's not being pro-business, or like he is being pro-business when he's not, or what way does it work?
So like it'll be interweaved. Like I'll there are whole pages in this that I completely agree with. That I'm like, yes, okay, what do we do? Okay, right, you're right. What do we do? It's like it's always got a much more Christian
Okay.
flavor, but it's essentially Bernie Sanders could have written like half of this book, essentially saying like, yeah, like we've allowed these corporations to take over our whole society. He's more worried about ESG and DEI than he is about the destruction of the environment or like stuff like that. But the fundamental thing, like BlackRock has too much power, Google has too much power. Like he's right about that. And he will just define this problem. I'm like, yep, you're right, you're right, you're right. It's actually a lot like a book by Matt Stoller, which is all about how monopolies have taken over the country. He uses the same language. He's like, monopolies have taken over the country. Yeah, yeah. And I'm like, and then, so the answer, like I'm writing that in the margins over and over in this book. Like, and what are we going to do about it? And it's so, because he does finally get to it. And he's like, he finally admits, after writing a book that's all about fundamentally how desperately we need competition law and unions in this country.
And maybe let businesses die.
But that too, like, and it's no, he doesn't say we need to let businesses die. He says we need to destroy them. That's what's so
Oh,
scary about the opening chapters. Like, we need to cut out the disease, and he, I think, somewhat presciently, he uses like wildfires as a like we need to do controlled burns of like da 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 da. And so he talks this way, and then, but his only policy prescription is deregulation,
oh,
which is essentially like, yeah, these businesses, like they've clearly, he's like, America, this message is essentially America today is a corporate created dystopia where these few monopolies have way too much power over our lives, our economic life. It's impossible for people to afford things. And what we need to do is lift the regulations that are making it harder for
Hmm.
corporations. It is honestly the funniest book I
But
have
does he
ever
have like
read.
a token thing? Because it kind of reminds me of like RFK. He's basically like, oh, in Europe they're so much better for their food, and if we take out this one thing that I've made a lot of videos about, everything will be fine. But he doesn't sort of say like, oh, we could just bring in government legislation to ban these things, and why have companies done this? Like, what's his like sacrificial lamb?
So he'll have a sentence somewhere. He'd be like, so there's a sentence where he's like, well, I'm really suspicious of antitrust. I think antitrust is bad. So I'm like, okay, so like this whole book is an ode to New Deal competition law that is against New Deal competition. It's absurd. But he'll be like, well, and I hate unions, but I also hate China. And I would like to point out that it was actually the UAW. This is an actual sentence. It was the only organization that said we shouldn't ship all our jobs to China. The United Auto Workers, a famous union in the United
Yeah,
States. So he'll like put in these little things, but it's very clear that he's generally
he's not pro union. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, he's no, he's complete. His answer to everything is deregulation when it's Heritage Foundation Reaganite deregulation that put us in this situation. Like it's the stupid. It's honestly the stupidest book I've ever
Does
read.
it get racist at all? Like, does he blame all the Haitians for everything or anything like
I mean,
that?
honestly, there's not that much.
Okay.
There's less about immigration than I would have expected in here. There's actually like there's a lot of like sensible definition of the problem, which is pro-business fundamentalism, but the only policy prescription he has is more pro-business fundamentalism. It's absolutely extraordinary. I actually found this book in one passage really, really helpful because I am getting to a point where I'm like turning into like a total 2016 election changed me. I'm turning into like a total New Deal
Hmm.
Democrat. I'm really suspicious of deregulation. People talking about deregulation. I think we probably in the United States need more like government intervention and regulation and whatnot. But at the same time, and these things can be true at the same time, I've gotten really interested in housing policy in the United States. And it's clear to me that one of the biggest problems throughout the country is environmental regulation around housing. Not like saying you have to build this in a certain way that's cleaner or you can't pollute. That's all great. It's a specific national policy called NEPA. I think it's the National Environmental the National Environmental Policy Act passed in 1970, and this created a system that is embellished. It's bad enough for the whole country, but it's actually embellished in certain blue states like New York and California. I think there's 7 states that add their own state versions of this, and it basically creates eternal processes to build anything, any significant
Is this the
infrastructure.
sort of NIMBYism, or what's the other one? Bananas don't build anything anywhere.
Well, yes, yeah. So it's basically it's the sword of NIMBYism has been this national NEPA
Would it
policy,
have
and
been
then
when it first was brought in? Do you think it made sense, but now it's just been slowly expanded upon to basically just be used as a don't build anything weapon?
I think it was an interesting idea that actually very quickly proved to be a bad one, but people liked it too much. NIMBYs liked it too much and worked too hard to keep it, that it's now been the law of the land for over 50 years. But what it means in practice, so I don't know if you know the congestion pricing kerfluffle in New York City. Did you hear about that?
Well, I've heard the way the London does it is right, and New York's sort of done it completely mad, and it's not really working well.
No, it's working amazingly well.
Okay.
That's just the
Oh, I'm
propaganda.
getting all the American biased media telling me that.
Yes, yeah. So, well, the thing is, Rory, we've been talking and arguing about congestion pricing in New York City for 15 years. It started, I think, 3 weeks ago.
Wow, because I think it's been in London for maybe 20 years now, to some degree.
Yeah, and it was a rousing success in London, and we started trying to do it. And basically, because of NEPA and the New York State version, basically everybody who had any kind of interest, basically anybody in New York who wanted to drive into work and not pay a toll could start a court case. So this is a bad piece of regulation. It should be deregulated. It should be done away with, or at least changed massively. But the thing is, that's just one thing, but it was confusing to me. I was like, you know what? Every day I become more and more pro-regulation, but the one regulation that comes up a lot in my study of New York politics and my study of housing is this bad regulation that I want to get rid of. So this is like a really clarifying thing because this is a book that's completely dedicated to deregulation. And I was not surprised at all that he has 2 solid pages talking about NEPA, talking about these environmental report requirements and legislation requirements and how bad they are. But there's this really helpful paragraph to me that helped clarify just the relationship of NEPA to the broader deregulatory movement. He says, NEPA is the tip of the iceberg, but a recent analysis by the Foundation for American Innovations, blah, 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 highlighted other regulations that impose subtler costs, including the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, the Clean Water Act of 1972, and above all, the Clean Air Act of 1970. During the Trump administration, the Department of Commerce polled American manufacturers about the specific regulations they viewed as most burdensome. NEPA didn't even make the top 10.
Hmm.
So the deregulation movement loves to talk about NEPA because NEPA is a legitimately stupid.
But would you say that it's quite common for the average American to dislike this?
Of course, because it's idiotic. It's clearly a problem, and it is only preserved because it gives every individual American the potential to stop. So I think everybody hates NEPA everywhere except in their own neighborhood where they get to use NEPA. So, but it's an acknowledged evil. It's obviously stupid and wrong. Is obviously bad for the country. And there's a 2-page description of how bad it is. That's the only regulation that actually gets described in this book. And I think this is a more Democratic-leading libertarians like
Mhm.
Ezra Klein or Matt Iglesias who talk about NEPA as well. And everybody agrees NEPA is bad. And I think that's really interesting. And it's a rhetorical trick that's very educational. And this guy kind of gives the game away. Like NEPA is what everybody who wants to talk about deregulation talks about at great length. But it's like not even the 10th most important thing that the deregulation people actually want to do away with. So they'll talk about NEPA, which everybody hates, when they really want to get rid of the Clean Air Act. They really want to get rid of the Clean Water Act. And that was just helpful to me personally for the Heritage Foundation guy to sort of like drop the curtain on that. It's like, oh, no wonder I'm so confused about like, wait, I feel like regulation's a good thing. Why do I think of NEPA whenever? Because it's a rhetorical trick that's being used politically is you talk about NEPA, which is obviously stupid, to give power to people like Trump who wants to do away with the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act.
Was it
Um,
Reagan that brought in the Clean Air Act?
no.
Okay. I thought, did he not
There
do a lot of environmentalism?
That's a Nixon. You're thinking of Nixon.
Ah, apologies.
So yeah, Reagan is absolutely not that kind of thing. I mean, it is interesting. So like these we talked about in the Carter episode, these things aren't as hard and fast as you would imagine. Like Carter, who's seen as the end of the New Deal era, actually did a lot of pro-business fundamentalism stuff, did a lot of Reaganite things. Reagan, at the very beginning of the sort of Reagan era, was still believed that U.S. government had a role in ways that, say, the Clinton administration or the Obama administration or the Bush administration didn't. So yeah, it's not that straightforward. But no, I don't think Reagan
Okay.
had a much of a. I think the first Bush actually had a expansion of the Clean Air Act,
Mhm.
or actually, this book might be wrong. Is the Clean Air Act maybe not 1970? Maybe it's 1990.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't expect the Heritage Foundation to get their facts right. I mean, it's just
1970?
oh, okay, that was 1970. But I do think that the first Bush did an expansion of the Clean Air Act
Mhm.
that I'm pretty
Okay.
sure about. Yes, that was just like really helpful. But it's fascinating because like there is an exception to this book's pro-corporate ideology, or like he's willing finally to name. It's interesting because he talks about the evil uniparty and the party of destruction or what have you. Not actually saying Democrats and Republicans. He's like, there's like fig leaves to bipartisans, but we all know what he's talking about here. And he's got these like, this really sweeping, brutal ways of talking about the opposition who must be burned out. But he's only willing to like name names but he also doesn't want to seem racist. So it's just this vague like DEI, the party of uncreation, ESG. One of the few things he's, and you know what, I wouldn't actually be very surprised if the earlier draft was a lot more explicit about being anti big tech. And the big anti big tech stuff that I found in here is probably like the stuff that survived a big edit once Elon Musk took over the Trump campaign. Like, but like he talks about Google, he talks about big tech, he talks about these things have to be broken up. And then you have fast forward to inauguration evening, and the inauguration is kind of extraordinary. The Trump administration last minute decided that the inauguration would not be held
Yeah.
outside. I think it's a little bit colder in DC than normal, but it's very
Well, I heard
usual.
it compared. I think Jimmy Carter's and like JFK's was colder,
And they were outside.
and they were outside.
Yeah. But this created a kind of a weird situation where you got a better sense of what Trump actually values, because for in an orgy of corruption, uh, business people, Republican Party donors, even non-Republican Party donors, just businesses who want to get in good with the people, with the Trump administration, donate tons of money for special tickets to the inauguration, for the parties, this, that, and the other thing. So there's just been this smorgasbord of every Republican, every business in the country has been funneling millions of dollars to the Trump campaign for these inauguration events. And sort of where you sit in the inauguration is incredibly important. This is easier when it's on the Capitol steps, right? And
Hmm.
then you can have like these rows and rows and rows and rows of seating, and this, that, and the other thing. It was now held, I think, inside the Capitol Rotunda. So he had to pick what actually mattered to him. And all of the big tech CEOs, I think even like the Paul brothers, or maybe that was just like big tech media, the sorts of people that Kevin D. Roberts think are really killing America, got priority in the rotunda, while like half the Republican governors in the country were sitting outside in the cold, or were in the next, the next building over watching it on TV. It's so funny that the only real concrete enemy that this Kevin D. Roberts guy identifies in his book is big tech. And on day one, they're sitting in the front row
Yeah.
of Trump's inauguration with Trump's cabinet members behind them. This is Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Jeff Bezos' trophy wife, where Mark Zuckerberg there's supposedly pictures of him eyeing Bezos' trophy wife.
He's looking at Jeff Bezos's tie.
Oh, sorry, that's what it was. Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, I believe Tim Cook, Sundar Pichai of Google, all just sitting there like, here we are, here's our new guy. Yeah, and of course Elon Sig Heil Musk. And yeah, it's amazing the beclowning of everybody who thought they knew what they were getting with
I
Trump.
think it's like close to nearly $1 trillion in personal wealth of just those gentlemen.
Yeah, there
It's
you go.
outstanding.
Yeah, this is our new anti-establishment.
But I think
president.
they were even in front of his own family, which is hard to believe.
It doesn't surprise me a bit. That is the world that we are stepping into, and it's going to be a huge mess. Lest you think that this is, an aberration or like a quick thing, or he wanted to get them there to kiss the ring and ha 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 ha. On day two, the biggest thing that he did was probably a big press conference with Larry Ellison of Oracle, Masayoshi Son of SoftBank. We've talked about SoftBank before.
Yeah.
This is the guy that's laundering Saudi and UAE money and to keep the tech bubble inflated and keep the party going. And Sam Altman of OpenAI met to basically provide a free PR boost to, it's called Stargate, which is meant to be a $500 billion
For
joint
AI
venture.
companies.
Joint venture for data centers, essentially. And it's extraordinary. Like, again, like this is a whole book. This is the Project 2025 guy talking about how bad monopolization is. And on day two of Trump's presidency, he's doing a big white Oval Office press conference, meet and greet, collective for a collusion of massive business interests. And I noticed they didn't mention this, but if you look in like the CNN article or whatever, they'll list some of the other affiliates in this absurd conglomerate. they include MGX. I was like, oh, what's MJX? And you Google it, and it's like, oh, that's a UAE
Hmm.
investment company. So it's just
Brilliant.
like the Gulf corruption, the big tech corruption. It's just this fire hose of plutocracy from the beginning.
The amount of, well, this happened under Biden, but it'll be supercharged. There was a lot of these companies didn't want to use fossil fuels for, running their businesses. So, and there was for years talk about, oh, we need to do more for nuclear. Nuclear is the future. It'll be brilliant. And the only thing it seems like it'll be used for is data centers. It'll be literally plugged straight to them. So I think, well, what was it? 5 Mile Island's being turned back on.
Yep, 3 Mile Island.
I
Yep.
think it's not the exact reactor, it's another reactor, but it's the same facility for Microsoft. So all this sort of theoretical clean technology that could help with day-to-day America is just going to help with AI.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay. I'm not too bothered by that. What I am bothered by is just the outsized corruption, favoritism, and
Did you think there was a bit of balance before when it felt like, Democrats had tech while the Republicans had a lot of the other more traditional companies, while now everyone's just in favor with the Republicans?
well, I think it's more tech taking over everything that I'm more concerned about. I think that's the thing. Though I saw somebody was saying like, oh, gosh, are other industrial people jealous of how prime the position of tech was? And I'm just like, what other industrial people? Like other industries are just, I mean, they exist in the United States, but they're largely, subordinated or swallowed by China. It's just these big, nasty tech companies that have market capitalizations that compete with Europe and Japan entirely. It is it's rather grim and rather dystopic. It's just there was another thing about this book that I thought was worth bringing up that Jesus, and it's funny because it does seem very convenient. If I were a sort of Republican vaccine conspiracy theorist, like this sort of thing, I'd be like, whoa, 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 wait, now Trump's president again, and now we're talking about bird flu? Like, it does seem very convenient. Unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that the natural world is in fact conspiring against
But
us.
it's good you've left the World Health Organization.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was teeing up. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. The Biden administration was not doing enough about this. I've never been claimed to be a medical professional, and I have always steered clear of COVID discussion for that reason. Unfortunately, people like this ass with a history degree, Joe Rogan, and a whole host of people with no medical background and negative scientific understanding have chosen to,
RFK.
yes, have chosen to create a reality of discussion about COVID that is completely illusory and is setting us up for horrific catastrophe if bird flu actually mutates and transitions the way that many scientists are saying it very possibly could. And not like in a like because scientists have been saying since the turn of the century, like bird flu, like this is a huge, I mean, I think SARS, which was what, 2002,
Yeah.
2003, really clarified a lot of people's thinking, got the Bush administration, not a administration I often make much have much nice to say about, put a ton of money and support in place around pandemic planning and preparedness. There's that amazing Steven Soderbergh film Contagion,
Hmm.
which is just like just shocking, like
Accurate.
how predictive that was. But the thing about Contagion is like I think in the movie they're talking about the bird flu. They're talking about something that could kill like 10-15% of the
Hmm.
world population
Wow. That's
relatively
terrifying.
quickly. Like that's what they're dealing with, and that's what the bird flu is. And like this book is suffused, like a lot of his like demonstration of the evils of government and the evils of the uniparty and the party of destruction is the horrible things that they did during COVID, making us do lockdowns. And like after it was pretty clearly demonstrated that the US public was so spiritually bankrupt and divided that it was incapable of doing lockdowns, I do agree that, yeah, it's absurd that some teachers' unions were trying to take the second year off. And yeah, I mean, sure, okay. But the real tragedy here is the utter failure of the United States to do basic things that countries like South Korea or Australia were able to do. And it just, the enshrining of this, like reading this book really, because like there's a lot of this that is outside of the US mainstream or whatnot, but I do think that the US mainstream opinion is that those lockdowns went pretty far, and Donald Trump got us some vaccines, and I think that's so freaking wrong. And I think some of that wrongness, like you can make a solid argument that perhaps the US and the world, parts of the US establishment and the world establishment overreacted to a disease that killed like 1% of elderly people, perhaps because they didn't like Donald Trump. I think that's an argument you can make. So I'm not saying this is just a Trump like it wasn't just the Trump and Republicans and right-wing people that failed here. It's also Democrats. It's like a wholesale failure of the establishment that we are so unprepared for the real deal, which would be a bird flu epidemic, which there are a lot of indications like bird flu had apparently jumped to herds of cows in the United States. And we now have a Canadian has died of bird
Okay.
flu. So basically the thing, it just needs to mutate enough so we've already got bird flu that has transitioned to humans, that has killed humans. It just needs to mutate enough, which apparently is likely to happen during a flu season, where it transitions as quickly as COVID did. And then we've got like Hollywood disaster movie stuff. And because of this environment that both Republicans and Democrats have created of this false narrative that, gosh, the countries that tried to do real lockdowns like Australia, gee, they were stupid. That's the narrative, the consensus narrative.
Okay.
So,
Because did Australia not do incredibly well compared to the vast majority of the world?
well, they did incredibly well, but then they did something that China did, which was they did incredibly well. They stopped the spread, and then they had to be like, oh, if we open up to the rest of the world,
We're in
we're
trouble.
going to get this disease anyway, because the United States specifically refused to do any kind of lockdown. So Australia and China can be criticized for being like, for maybe holding on to their lockdown procedures longer. It took them a while to acknowledge just how incredibly irresponsible and absent U.S. leadership was going to be, and they held on to lockdowns for too long. And that's the thing. Most of the world is like, yeah, Australia and China did amazing jobs. I think in the United States, beyond the Joe Rogan Heritage Foundation thing, the consensus is, no, 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 those countries were stupid for their lockdowns.
Okay.
Like I think that's the normie view in the United States now. So
Do you think a lot of this skepticism comes from the fact that American healthcare is so difficult and expensive for the average American?
I think that's a very perceptive point. Yeah, I think that just like we're supposed to trust, this system that mostly just functions to take obscene amounts of money from us. And yeah, it is legit, like insanity of claiming that Bill Gates was going to inject, a microchip in you with the
It is
vaccines.
sad that the amount of horrible things Bill Gates has done, but it felt like something that genuine good he tried to do for the world was a thing a lot of people seem to despise him for.
Yeah, and I get that, but also isn't it a little weird that a tech billionaire was like,
Oh yeah, one of the biggest ones trying to stop this.
yeah, isn't it a little weird that like he was like part of being the face and the leadership? Like, shouldn't a president have done that? Which is of course a Trump failing, but like, yeah, it is weird the way the United States organizes things at this sort of after 40 years of pro-business fundamentalism and Reaganism. That's right. I mean, so I'm not like saying, oh, it's like Trump's fault exclusively that we're so vulnerable to the bird flu. It's not. Like societally in a mess. I don't think anybody in the Biden administration wanted to acknowledge how badly US leadership had screwed up the COVID crisis. I don't think anybody in the New York Times did either. So when we have I mean, if you just Google, like there are New York Times articles on this. There are CNN articles on this going back like a couple months now, going back to early 2024, talking about, oh yeah, bird flu is looking like a more real thing than it has ever. And we should be worried about this. For Donald Trump on his first day in office to say we're withdrawing from the World Health Organization.
Yeah. I think
is,
it
I
might
mean,
take a year for it to fully kick in, but even at that, like, there's a lot of stuff. A lot of chickens seem like they'll have to be destroyed in the UK, and that's just happening as recording.
yeah, so yeah, it'll take a year. Who knows? Perhaps a year from now, 15% of us will be dead. And the whole idea of withdrawing from the World Health Organization will seem as silly as most of the things we were focused on here in January of 2025.
You see much going wrong very suddenly that might force, because I know Ronald Reagan, didn't he, like, lower taxes so much that he had to then raise them? Is it possible Trump causes like sudden immediate damage that then causes him to sort of ease off on a lot of his plans?
We'll see. That's a great question. There's been sweeping changes made already to the workforce. I think he's already like putting things in place to like, I think he's already furloughed a lot of the people in the US government who work on like DEI programs or whatever, as a preliminary to firing them. I mean, I don't really think, I mean, honestly, I think DEI kind of died the day that Joe Biden took office. Like, it's not like, it's just hasn't been a societal priority. And like I don't know, like that's the thing with Trump is that there are a lot of people who are trying to build a framework around MAGA and Trumpism for real change. But Trump is just kind of psyched that he's the president again now. That's his
Yeah, because
main.
at that press conference, he was just giving out zingers and thinking Spain was in bricks. It was, he was quite humorous at times.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's his like
So is it
his.
possible we kind of get what we did before? A lot of like Trump doing strange stuff and a lot of people getting fired and arguing amongst themselves.
Well, what's different this time around is that there's no hashtag resistance. It's I think it's pretty. There's no, oh, this isn't us. This is some kind of strange aberration. No, like he won the popular vote. Like this dude's president. This dude's America.
But do you think it's different that there's a kind of, it's only 4 years waited out and then the Republican Party can go back to its normal self?
Oh, the Republican Party's never going back to its normal self. If it does, it'll be as pointless and useless as the Democrats.
Who can you see the Trump Trivia Act being?
Well, JD Vance is certainly in the lead at this
Okay.
point. I think that was in part why he was appointed as vice president. It's actually kind of a savvy, forward-looking choice by the Trump camp to avert exactly that kind of thing. Putting Marco Rubio in as Secretary of State is a kind of an example. That would be okay, we're going to go back to the old Trump. Traditionally, the Secretary of State and the Vice President are sort of like the proving grounds of like going to be the next president places. But I've read some scuttlebutt, and I wouldn't be very surprised if like Rubio isn't Secretary of State for very long.
Okay.
Like that's somebody I could
Because is
see
he not one of
flaming.
the more sensible people that he's picked so far?
Oh, I loathe Marco Rubio's politics.
No, but I think, as he's sort of like generic Republican, like he's not completely
He's
MAGA.
generic Republican, but like he's a generic Republican of the neocon school. Like he's the guy who wants to invade Venezuela. He was a big part in the first Trump administration of that catastrophe. He's like, but yeah. So I've seen some sort of suggestions that he might not last long as Secretary of State, and I'd be very happy if he didn't. So, but yeah, the idea of going back to the old Republican Party before Trump is impossible. Like because it just as it's impossible to go back to, I don't know, the Clinton Democratic Party. I really firmly believe, as we've talked about before, that we're in a race between the Republican and the Democratic parties to see who grows out of pro-business fundamentalism, neoliberalism, who grows out of it first. And whichever party does that first will set the tone for the coming decades. And the other party will, just copy what they do.
Can you see the Democrats actually listening to the likes of Bernie Sanders anytime soon, or will it still just be like sort of as if Hillary Clinton's in charge and just
The indications aren't good. Yeah, I like they don't seem to be learning much at this point. I think a lot happens. It depends on what happens with Trump. God, it would be so amazing, and he does seem to be putting people in place. Like you get really horrible indications, like this creature Pete Hegseth for Department of Defense. I know him as the guy who convinced Trump to pardon a bunch of U.S. war criminals that were convicted by the Pentagon.
I think they were like especially horrific, weren't they?
Well, yeah, if the Pentagon picked them
Yeah.
out and said, these guys are war criminals, our soldiers are war criminals, we're going to court martial them and put them in jail for a very long time because of war crimes they have committed that have besmirched the honor of the United States. Like the US military did that. And then Pete Hegseth, a Fox News commentator, convinced Donald Trump to set those guys free and pardon them. And that's honestly, that is combined with like the Joe Arpaio pardon are some of the things that Donald Trump did that I think are some of the worst and most fascist things he did during his first term. And that's the guy. I mean, people are focusing on the fact that he's a active drunk, womanizer. It seems also a woman beater. Like those are things worth focusing. But for me, Pete Hegseth will always be that. So that's a horrible indication. However, yesterday we heard that Brian Hook got fired, and Brian Hook is the sort of maximum pressure guy for Iran. So who knows? Like you could imagine Donald Trump could really potentially, and I think this is the thing he's got. Like Biden is an awful human being who completely lacked courage and should always be remembered as Genocide Joe, but he was kind of politically constrained by how weak he was electorally. Trump, like the only thing barring Donald Trump from like politically from doing whatever he wants, like if Trump wanted it, and he's illustrated that he can, like he could have peace in the Middle East
Because
and peace in Ukraine by the end of the year.
I think what he's saying is basically he's just going to hit Russia with more tariffs if they don't stop and allies. So he could just keep the supplies to Ukraine going as usual and just threaten more. Now Russia kind of, it seems like its big hope was once Trump gets in, everything will change. And now it's got that it's like, oh no, it's the same as ever. And now we're hitting with more tariffs.
Yeah, and I think that Trump could bring peace to the Middle East and peace in Ukraine this year. The only thing, so he doesn't have any political constraints. He doesn't care about graduating and getting on a defense board. Sorry, like finishing, like he doesn't care about being 82 on the board of Northrop Grumman. He's wealthy. He doesn't. There's no like nobody in. Republicans have tried for 8 years and have failed miserably at being like, oh, Trump's a friend to dictators. He'll be like, F you. So the only realistic constraint that the military industrial complex has against Trump at this point would be assassination.
Wow.
He could possibly just be doing the math in his head. It's like, well, how far can I push this without getting shot by the CIA? So he could actually get peace in the Middle East and Ukraine by the end of the year. Will he do that? If he does do that, I think he then will have truly started the possibility of a real reorientation of U.S. politics.
Could you see him doing something popular? Like, say he tried to improve the healthcare of America and make it more like Canada's, let's say, like completely radical. Could you see him just then being like massively popular forever?
It's funny. It was something I was really scared of in 2017 and I think Steve Bannon, who was his initial, oh God, was he his was it Secretary of Staff, Chief of Staff initially? Steve Bannon, Steve Bannon helped Trump win with sort of a populist message, and I think Steve Bannon wants to be a full European right-wing party with socialism and hostility to immigrants, but actually providing social services. Like that's what Steve Bannon wanted. And I was terrified in 2017 that Steve Bannon was going to get that. And we were going to get like if Trump really wants to be the Ronald Reagan or the FDR, that's what he'd do. Like he would do a radical, he would say like, okay, we're sorting out healthcare right now. That is the promise of Trump, because he really does have a sort of freedom from politics as usual. He really could do great things in stopping wars. He really could, if he wanted to, be like, let's sort out healthcare, pick up 5 easy answers that have been sitting on the shelf for 30 years, implement them, and yeah, we would talk about the FDR era, the Reagan era, then the Trump era. I don't think he's got the people. I don't think he's got the long-term sense to do that. I think it's going to be just insane corruption all the time. I mean, you saw this Trump
It's then,
coin.
yeah. So it's a rug pull, which is essentially where let's say you mint a load of coins So you meant a million. You and me keep half of them, Rob, and then we release it to the public. And then once it shoots up, we sell our coins that were secret up until then. We make a huge amount of money, and then once the energy goes, it just is worth nothing. We've made millions. And
Yeah,
then the
it's pure
Melania one,
grift.
and he might
Pure grift.
do multiple for the rest of the family. I don't know yet, but oh yeah, it's the stuff you talked about that FDR kind of ruled out because in the 20s, this is what was happening with stocks.
Yeah. Yep. And this, yeah, it's
100 years later, we're at it
it's
again.
it's incredibly bleak.
If
But
you
what
could
is
if you could control Trump and make him do one thing, essentially, what would you have him do?
he did it already.
What's that?
He stopped the genocide.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, look, the chances of the genocide restarting by the time we upload this thing are very high. The vast likelihood is that this is another 4 wasted years of obscene corruption and nothing actually getting fixed. But yeah, if in my wildest dreams of a positive thing that Trump would do, he did it already. So
Okay.
I'm gonna. He is surrounded by an idiotic oligarchy. Just one thing on foreign policy. This book is amazing because it also makes the basic critique of like we've wasted all this time. Middle East military terrible, blah 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 blah, and then the closing and then the title of this chapter is so basically this guy's like, and he says in some honest passages like I got taken in, I was a generic conservative guy, but I was wrong, and chapter 9 of his book is we can't coexist with communist China. It's just like so basically he's like I was an idiot and I'm psyched to get fooled again. And it's you can find articles in the New York Times being like, Trump's really in bed with China. And like, if Trump was really in bed with China, that's like, oh, cool. We don't do World War III. Yeah, I'm all right with that. So it is fascinating that like Trump, I guess the thing to be most hopeful about Trump is that he is surrounded by some people who are savvy, some people who know what they're doing to evil intent, some people who know what they're doing to great good intent. He's mostly surrounded by idiots who are expecting him to do a number of things he's simply not going to do. In his first term, like the number of people that he ended up betraying, and I mean, just the complete beclowning of like figures like John Bolton or H.R. McMaster, or even a figure that people had a lot more respect for, Jim Mattis, is, interesting and fun to see, frankly. And if he does truly have people in his orbit this time who actually wants to make America great again in worthwhile ways, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit for Donald Trump to take up. I think that's probably not actually what's going to happen, going to be what's going to happen, but who knows? And he's already done the main thing that I wanted him to do. So we'll see.
So on that happy note, let's hope Trump does lots of nice things for the world and
Indeed.
the American working class.
Indeed.
And not all his billionaire friends.
Indeed.
Because they have enough money.
Indeed.
Ciao, ciao.
The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire: What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. And music provided by Kevin MacLeod.